Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming here this evening to this meeting of the Employment Committee. We are item 1, the evacuation procedure. You all know it. I think Councillor Morton is new, but he's going to have to get used to it. Item 2, apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Tracy Shepherd, apologies from Councillor Green, who's being substituted by Councillor Wilson, who is running late, I believe, and apologies from Councillor Brown, who is being substituted by Councillor Morton. Welcome, Councillor, because I think this is your first meeting, isn't it? So, hopefully not too exciting. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. Now, I think I'm the only councillor who is actually here for that, so I'll move them from the chair. The councillors present aren't really in a position. Would somebody like to second it so we can proceed? Yeah, so all those in favour? Right, so that's unanimous, so I will sign those minutes after the meeting. Item 4, declarations of interest. Obviously there's substituting councillors, but I take it we can take it as read that it's the same as you've got nothing to declare. Right, okay, thank you very much. Item 5, public consultation. Have we had any notice of public speakers? Nope. So item 6, we have HR metrics data, which will be introduced by you're down in the papers as the corporate HR business partner, but I believe you're ahead of now. Yes. So congratulations, Ruth Bartlett. Could you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. So this first report is a standard report for those councillors that have not been to the meeting before for this employment committee. It's a summary of statistical information for key areas of HR, and just happy to take any questions or queries.
Does any member wish to speak to this report? Councillor Mrs. Trotmans.
Thank you, Chair. First time at the Employment Committee, so I'm probably going to ask silly questions, but my background is HR, so I feel quite passionately about this. I just wanted to ask the question, looking at the metrics, we talk about recruitment and there are some statistics in there for advertisements, success, etc. I think we all recognise that recruitment is generally problematic at the moment for every sector. So do we use different methods of recruitment for different grades of staff? And how do we monitor the success of those different forms of advertising? I see the numbers, but it's more about how do we measure the success of it? Not only that somebody is recruited and retains a job, but which methods are most successful? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So, yes, I'd appreciate it's your first employment committee, but in the first employment committee, I think it was in November, a recruitment and retention report was issued there, which recommended some changes to the recruitment policy, which included the way that we recruit, the way that we advertise, and our application method. So now we do have different application methods for different roles. So, you know, some might be one-click apply, like a CV, for example. Some is a full application form. For other roles, it may just be employment history, depending on the nature of the role. By and large, we advertise on West Midlands Jobs portal, which is an online portal. But again, we do also advertise in external publications, and we do monitor that. As you can understand, the change in the application process is quite a recent thing. So in terms of stats, those aren't readily available at the moment, but they will come forward to the future employment committees.
Does any other member wish to speak on this item? I know Councillor Wilson has just come in the room. No. Councillor Morton.
Could I just ask one specific question? I see the data's in figures rather than percentages, and the benchmarking. Are Rugby, Warwick and North Warwickshire similar sized boroughs in terms of workforce, or is there anything we can read by that comparison?
So there was, again, on the last report, which was the first metrics report, it gave that benchmarking information in terms of size of the authority. I can, by all means, circulate that to you. So they are smaller. They have similar services, so in terms of benchmarking, it is quite difficult to benchmark like for like in terms of services. So they are the smaller, but the last report, what that did was take into account the size of their HR team per FTE, if you like, to try and have some sort of comparability, but it is difficult. There's not many authorities that report this sort of information.
So, thank you very much. Any other member? No, okay. So the point I wanted to raise, Ruth, was under 3.6, attendance management. And I think this is part of the reason we have this report, this committee at all. Some of our departments are pretty adrift of where we need to be, and this is something that does come up in the quarterly performance report. Are you, as the sort of HR responsible officer, able to explain to us tonight, and it sounds slightly accusatory, I don't mean it to be, why they're so far adrift? And if not, can investigations be made to come back to us and explain why they're not doing it? Because some of these, at least one of these departments, we've had cause to look at before at this committee. So would you be able to?
Of course, yes. So certainly for this year to date, I can explain those. So as noted in the report, the poorly performing area for return to work compliance is town centres. As a background to that, that actually accounts for one return to work interview that they had issued, and that is within the CCTV section who work nights. So it was quite difficult to arrange that return to work, albeit it can be done by telephone. That has now been completed, but outside of the compliance time. And for information, management team have stated, and this will be carried forward, that where there is no clear explanation for the failure in performance, improvement notes will be issued.
Right, so thank you very much. So if there's no other member wish to comment, I think we can note the report and move on to next business. Right, thank you very much. So item 7, the people strategy. Ruth, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report outlines the requirement for a people strategy, which actually came forward from the LGA peer review. As you may be aware, a people strategy can be quite wide-reaching and quite large. So this aims to focus on some key areas that include recruitment and retention and would make us an attractive employer. So this isn't the people strategy in itself, but this helps us form that background work and those working groups to get a base of where we are at the moment and therefore where we want to be. So happy to take any queries on the report.
Does any member wish to speak or comment on the report? Councillor Mrs. Dromond?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question. Do we have any kind of active succession planning that the employees would recognise, particularly career employees?
In terms of active and actively monitoring, I would say no. However, we do have succession planning in terms of we have a number of career graded roles within certain sections, but it's not necessarily formalised as a career path, and this is where this strategy would hope to pick that up.
Any other member? Councillor Morton first, please.
Thank you. I've got one question around 6.4. Very much the first time I read it. I like the document anyway, I think it's good, but the first few pages are clearly about the values and what you're trying to achieve here, which is great. And then when it comes to the key competencies around leadership, I was looking in there for a clear competency around actually recognising staff. Rather than people management sounds like it's what you do to people, and managing yourself is what you do to yourself. I was looking for something what you do for your people. And I just wondered where in that comes in. I just wondered whether it could be clearer as a manager to understand his core competencies, actually to look after your staff by facilitating, training, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So in terms of the core areas of the people strategy, leadership development being one of them, these bullet points at 6.4 will, obviously they can be expanded upon, but the hope is that they will contribute to a behavioural competency framework for managers that they can work to. So within those bullet points, if you like, would be those things in terms of, well, actually what does inclusivity mean in terms of people management? And then the other core elements in terms of developing talent and the employer engagement and recognition would all feed in. So it's hoped that these core principles will link. But yes, that those bullet points are aimed at top level to create that behavioural competency framework.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being late. I was stuck on the delightful roads between Nuneaton and Leamington. So, in terms of leadership development, I think Councillor Troman's point about succession planning we need to take much more seriously as an authority, because I know we are in a very, very competitive world in terms of recruitment. And I know that, for example, there are some members of staff who are leaving and trying to find replacements either on the internal stage or on the open market is going to be very difficult. So I think we need to have a more formal succession planning policy. So I would move that as a recommendation, Chair, if that finds favour with the rest of the committee. And looking at, I think that needs to include like talent workshops, and that should also look at being reported to senior management team for each of the different directorates and how we can support them in doing that and making sure they have adequate training plans. And I'm talking from personal experience here that is very important, because if you don't have succession planning in place and someone, heaven forbid, gets knocked over by a bus or whatever, and you find yourself the next day that you need to have someone step up into those shoes, you can find yourself in great difficulties. I think there's also some merit in looking at greater use of, in my workplace we call it TRA or temporary promotion, and how we can look at using that to help build key skills. So even if someone is going on leave, shall we say, for 2 weeks, or as your good self, Mr. Shardlow, had paternity leave, someone who can use that opportunity to actually act up into those roles and build those levels of experience moving forwards. Now, they may not get a permanent job if that comes up, but it gives them a better opportunity for examples when it comes to those competencies at interview. And looking at paragraph 6.4, if these are to form the basis of some kind of competency framework, I think there are two which I would like to see added. I think managing this is my civil service speak now, but I'm used to having to deal with these. I think managing a quality service, I think sometimes actually we forget as an authority we are here to deliver a service to the customer. And I would like to see how a leader actually goes about delivering or ensuring that we have a good level of customer service on that front as well. And there was another one which is now, seeing the bigger picture. I think sometimes people can get a silo mentality, and perhaps they need to see how their area of work impacts the rest of the department and the rest of the council, and how that fits into the wider scheme of things. And in my experience, some of the best leaders are those who can do the horizon scanning and can look at the different pieces across the whole range of areas and actually see the bigger picture. And you might have to take a hit somewhere to get temporarily to actually make further gains for the long term in another area. So I think as leaders we need to make sure that our leadership team actually starts looking at those areas of competency too. So I would suggest those as amendments too, if they find favour with the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I'll second those from the Chair. Does any other member wish to speak, or Ruth, do you want to come back on any of those points? Yep, Ruth first.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I've noted those bullet points, and just on the seeing the bigger picture, I think that would link into some of the business transformation work that Tom is doing, so definitely. Just on a note, in terms of the formal succession planning, part of the people strategy talks about having a skills gap analysis and a training needs analysis, but part of gathering that information will actually also tell us what skills we have that we're not aware of, which will help with that succession planning and those acting up opportunities, which we do. So Tom had someone deputised for him at management team, for example. So yes, definitely all of that taken on board in terms of this. This is quite high level at the moment, so there's a lot of working groups already in process for it.
Thanks, Ruth. Any other member wish to speak? Nope. Well, I'm quite pleased with a lot of this document, and I'm very pleased to see that development and reward are so highlighted in it, because Councillor Wilson is quite right to point out that we do need succession planning, but it's also that will assist our recruitment and retention, so that people don't just feel that they're turning up and they've got a job. They've actually got a pathway to a better life, to professional qualifications, that they can see themselves getting further on in life, that they can earn more, and then they can develop themselves and make more of a difference. So I think that's very much the way to go. The only thing that gives me pause, and I don't know what the committee would feel about this, is under section 8, which is promoting an inclusive environment, and I think we have to be very careful in terms of the way in which we interpret that, because it says under 8.1, fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace. Those terms can have very different meanings now, and it's very fashionable to, how should I put this, it can be interpreted as advocating a particular worldview. And my suggestion on that point, would it not be better to go down the route, and I can't quite find the right phrase, which is perhaps if we were to build a workplace where individual merit is rewarded and each individual feels valued and that their talents are recognised. And that might be the way to do it, because if we then treat people as discrete individuals, rather than aiming for diversity as an end in itself, and we're completely meritocratic, you will get diversity anyway. You will get a diversity of views, and you will get different experiences and that sort of thing. Now, I know that we do have a duty under the Equality Act. We have the Public Sector Equality Duty, but I think that we need to be very careful of going down some of the routes that a lot of corporate HR departments are going down, which is promoting these things as an end in itself. So, because that very much confuses equality of opportunity with equality of outcome. And that's something I think we do need to avoid as an authority. And this is one of the few occasions when I will express political beliefs in this, but it's very much against my political beliefs that we should treat people as individuals, that in each human being there is a spark of the divine, and that we should approach them on that basis. So on that basis, I would also have quite a lot of concern about 8.7, what was it, unconscious bias training, because again, that's very fashionable at the moment, and a lot of corporate HR departments are using that as a bit of a PR win, but I think that might approach things from the wrong direction. And in fact, I think not too long ago, the chairman of the Equality and Human Rights Commission said that actually may do more harm than good, because it may foster an atmosphere of divisiveness and suspicion rather than meritocracy and individual merit. But that was my only reservation. Otherwise, I think it's a very good report. And Ruth, do you want to come back on that, or are we happy to move to the vote? Okay. Are you happy to incorporate that? Does the committee have any comments on my comments? Does it find support? I'm seeing some nods. So with those provisos of mine and Councillor Wilson's, all those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 8, which is the Agile and Hybrid Working Strategy. Ruth, could you take it away?
So thank you, Chair. This is, you may be aware that the Council has operated under an agile working principle since 2016, so well before the pandemic. The pandemic obviously has brought its challenges, and a lot more of us are working more agilely and at home. That has started, people are in the office more now. But this aim of this, we set up a working group to review the agile working policy and the pros and cons of agile versus hybrid working, because they are very different things. And this report lays out some results from that working group and suggestions of a way forward, potentially of surveying a wider group of the workforce, and the pros and cons of hybrid versus hybrid agile working, where we're at now. So just happy to take any.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Does any member of the committee have any comments on this report? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at page 33 of our agenda, where it looks at hours of work and availability. I think we might need to make a slight amendment in the communication system, Skype for Business, and perhaps include /Teams, because I'm aware that Skype for Business is due to be phased out if it's not already gone. I'm so used to the Teams world, I've forgotten how to use Skype by now, if it still exists. But that's probably more indicative of my job than anything else. So that probably needs to be amended. But also, I think we need to put in somewhere about updating the global address list with people's roles, responsibilities and telephone numbers, contacts, etc., or their working patterns, so that I'm thinking from a member perspective here, that if we have an issue and we want to know which officer to go to, we can find their details on the global address list quite quickly. It may be worth investigating. I don't know whether it's, well, I know it's possible because it happens in my work, but every so often we get a pop-up reminding us to update our global address list details. I don't know whether that's something that IT can look at, just to make sure that things are up to date and when people move jobs, etc., that they update that. But I think with this as well, we need to, as a whole, and I'm in favour of hybrid working, and I know that that has helped us secure some jobs which we probably wouldn't have been able to secure under the old way of doing things, is still making sure that there is a way that officers are contactable by members, because I'm aware that there are some members who feel that post-COVID officers are less contactable, especially as they're not in the office, whereas before they could pop into the town hall, pop their head around a door and see an officer. Now I accept there has to be a balance to be struck, but perhaps if we can have that information and a bit more thinking with the SMT about how we can incorporate that as a cultural change as well, because so long as we have those details updated on the GAL, for example, every member now has access to Teams, so we should be able to contact them in some way, shape or form. But I think making sure that that information is up to date is critical. Otherwise, members will start to lose faith in the system, and we'll have more demands for people in the office. And I can understand where they're coming from, but it's not the way that the world is going, or how we're going to be able to hire people for critical jobs. Because to be honest, I don't see the need to have, say, an accountant sat in the town hall looking at spreadsheets. You can quite easily look at a spreadsheet sat at home, so long as they are doing the work. Or likewise with a planning application, for example, you can zoom into a planning application just as well on your laptop at home than you can sat in the office. But we have to make sure that the essential services in the office and contacts are covered. So perhaps we need to make sure that there is some kind of duty system like there is for senior management team, where all the directors have that, whether there's some way of having a duty system for critical systems and services within the council, and perhaps that could be updated on the members area, so that we can log in to see if we have an emergency call, who's on the duty roster for emergencies. Just some suggestions to try and make sure that whilst we take this policy forward, we need to make sure that officers remain responsive to members' needs as well.
Just on the contact details in the global address book, when an employee or anyone starts with a council, they're assigned a phone number based on their sort of Active Directory Microsoft account. That should never change. There should never be a need for the staff members to update their phone number. What we don't do, and probably could do, I think, is on things like Skype and Teams and that sort of thing, is the capacity to upload the hierarchy. So if you're searching for Joe Blogs, you should be able to click on them and then see what team they're in first of all, who are their team members, and then equally who then are their supervisor, their manager, ultimately right up to the chief executive, which can be very useful. You know, a long time ago I used to work in a contact centre. You know, if you're trying to get hold of Bob's not available. Well, who are his colleagues? Well, I can see there, and I can see their status. I can see Fred is now green, so I can just try and contact him. Actually, this isn't being sorted, so I can go up a layer, and that would probably be helpful for members and probably customer services as well. So, yeah, we can definitely do it. I think it's probably linked to our HR system and getting that synchronised with the Microsoft Active Directory, but it's something we could take away and think about, I think, which would probably solve most of those issues, I think.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak? Councillor Mrs. Dromans.
Thank you, Chair. More of a softer question, really. How do we monitor the well-being, the health and safety, etc., of employees who are working remotely? Quite often people will work remotely because they feel that is what the rest of their team is doing and that is what is expected of them. How do we sort of flag up if somebody is feeling a little bit isolated or is falling behind or struggling with that setup? Thank you.
Sorry, thought I'd pressed it. Sorry. To clarify, these are the current policies, so they do need to be reviewed in line with some of the comments that Councillor Wilson's been making. And in terms of flexible working, with the pandemic, people are working a lot more flexibly and at home, and not just at home, but different hours than they probably would have before, so that all needs to be incorporated. And in terms of managing those individuals at home, we have regular one-to-ones, regular check-ins, was Skype, now Teams, instant messaging, etc. And we've just implemented a wellbeing plan document, which is a conversation between a manager and employee. So we can establish that need for how regular do you want to be contacted? Is it just an hello in the morning? What are your triggers for mental health issues, for example? So that is an action plan that would be unique to each employee.
Just to add as well, more formally, all staff have what's called a DSC assessment. So each year or 6 months, whatever it might be, they have a formal process to go through to say, what's your working environment, have you got any issues? So from that formal health and safety perspective, that's been verified through that process as well.
Thank you very much. Any other member? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on about DSE assessments and having them done at home, can we monitor the level of additional expenditure that may incur? Because if people need to have specialised desks or chairs, etc., then that would fall onto the council usually, or the employer. Certainly that's my experience of having to do that through the pandemic. And obviously if we have a large number of members of staff who may need that, I'm not saying it's going to be great numbers, but any number is a financial cost to the council. I think we need to monitor the cost to the council on that as well, because some of these bespoke chairs can be 200, 300, 400 quid, and over say 5 or 6 members of staff, that soon adds up. And desks, and you can have desks which rise because people have musculoskeletal issues. So I think that might also be something that needs to be monitored and perhaps reported to the Employment Committee on a yearly basis about what that expenditure is, because I think that has to have a bearing in terms of any review of the policy as to whether the payoff is worth it. I'm not saying it isn't, but we have to be aware of those additional costs.
I think in most cases we wouldn't duplicate it, so we wouldn't have a duplicate setup at home as well as in the office, so it'd be the same cost as it is now. Obviously we're obliged, if somebody has an impairment which is covered by the Equalities Act, to provide reasonable adjustment, of which might be a desk or a chair or something like that. I think very rarely would we would replicate a setup both at home and in the office. There has to be a very special case for that. I don't think there's been very much of that at all. So typically when people have left during the pandemic, had they been working in the office predominantly and now working at home, they've taken their equipment with them to use at home kind of thing.
That would be all right if their main location of work would be at home, but if we're talking about a hybrid model here, and that's what the policy is. So it could imply that you do 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. You can't keep carrying your chair between 2 locations. So either you would have to consider refusing an application for a hybrid model, or you would have to look at having 2 sets of chairs, and that's what I'm saying, that we need to look at the cost and whether the benefit is there, because if the home is their full-time base, I completely understand you wouldn't have a duplicate set, but if they are doing 2 days here and 3 days there or whatever, it's not reasonable to expect them to hump the chair in the car, bring it up the stairs, etc.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very sensible suggestion. Councillor Wilson and I both know that we do need to count the pennies at the moment at this authority. And I think Councillor Wilson is right. It is very much about getting the right balance between being attractive as an employer, because it's the way the world's going, being a good employer, because it is easier for people to work from home. It's 2 hours extra in bed for me, certainly. But also getting the right results and getting the right productivity. And I do have a few questions for Ruth, if that's all right. At 3.7 on page 20, it does talk about consideration of the pros and cons. I'm just curious, since we moved to this flexible hybrid working system, have we actually done any sort of productivity studies as to whether it's more effective, more efficient? Have we noticed any drop-off? Have we even given thought to monitoring that? Would be my first question. The second question is, it was similar to on the page that Councillor Wilson, those core hours seem quite limited. Could you just sort of talk us through the rationale behind that? Because I know, certainly from my experience, the core hours are still basically make sure 9:30 to 4:30 in my experience of employment. So could you just talk us through those points, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, on productivity, I'm not aware of any formal monitoring. We're not in a formal hybrid situation at the moment, whereas formal hybrid would be contractually, you work at home for 2 days, you work in the office for 3, etc. So we're still in that agile working module at the moment. And in terms of, so we haven't done any productivity that I'm aware of. Certainly, speaking for my team, I would say we're definitely more productive working at home. But in terms of the flexible working hours, those are very historic. And if you move to more formal agile stroke hybrid working arrangements, there is consideration to be had that service always comes first and service delivery. So there will be some service areas that provide a service 9 till 5 to their customers, and that always comes first. But some councils have done away with flexible working core bands completely, or implemented more where I think our bandwidths when I first started here were 9 till 12 and then 2 till 3 for core hours. And then they moved to these quite limited core hours. So there's scope there. Certainly with the pandemic, people are working, and it's this balance between work-life balance and balancing mental health needs and all those things. There are people that are working even outside of our bandwidths, logging in at 6 in the morning and working till 10 at night, but having a large chunk in the middle of the day missing potentially, which may work for their service. But it's coming back to undertaking that survey of the wider workforce to understand the needs of the service versus the needs of the employees and how that fits with being an attractive employer, and trying to find that balance then.
Which was leading me on to my next question. I don't know if that I misread the report, but there's talk of a working group of managers and officers on this. So just so I'm clear, has that group reported, or is that it's still in the process of doing its work, and are we going to go out to the workforce?
So we've had 2 meetings of that working group. It's a varied working group, so there are people that don't agile work, that provide frontline services. There's IT are on there as well, obviously from a system point of view. So we've had 2 meetings, and it has become clear that in some areas agile working doesn't work for the service, but it works for the employees, clearly. So we need to get back. I think there's a sense that some services have fallen into the habit of working agilely because it worked during the pandemic, but obviously we need to get back to delivering those services. So out of that working group, the recommendation for the survey of the wider workforce came. So that is still ongoing. Once we've done that survey, it'll go back to the working group.
So we need to wait on the results of that survey, but you're not putting it quite explicitly, but we need to actually do a proper analysis of, like I was hinting, is it actually affecting productivity and service delivery? So we shall proceed with that review. Does any other member wish to speak? No. And then we shall note this report and then await with interest the results of the survey. Thank you very much, Ruth. Item 9, I think we're on item 9. Yep, HR policy documents, which is DBS policy. Ruth, would you like to take it away again, please?
So this is a DBS policy. I think a query was raised at an audit and standards meeting some months ago in terms of eligibility to undertake a DBS check. So this is the policy. The council provides a service both internally for DBS checks and externally as a registered body. So this policy is compliant with that legislation and our requirements, and it does highlight that actually from a basic check point of view, there is no criteria, so anyone can apply for a basic check.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to comment or speak on this one? Right, I think this is very much a motherhood and apple pie one. It's basically statutory, so I think we shall accept the recommendations. All those in favour? Thank you very much. So item 10, the work programme, which is the back of your agenda. Does any member wish to speak on the work programme? Are there any recommendations, or are we happy to accept it? Right, so I'm seeing no dissent. So we shall accept the work programme. Item 11, I haven't had any notice of any other business. So in which case, item 12, I shall move the exclusion of the public and press from the chair. Is that that receive a seconder? Councillor Mrs. Tromans, all those in favour? That is unanimous. So could we please switch off the live stream?